Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video talking to you about this B&T GHM9. Now this isn't going to be like a typical review for me simply because I don't have enough rounds through this thing for me to feel as though I can adequately give you my thoughts enough to do a review. However, I have put about 300 rounds through this thing today, and I figure I'll give you my opinions on it thus far, give you a little bit of an overview of this pistol, how it's set up, how I have it configured, and kind of what my impressions are at this point. So first, let me go ahead and roll in some footage of me shooting this thing, and then we'll jump into what this thing is. So again, this is the GHM9, which stands for Grasshopper Mouse 9. Apparently, the Grasshopper Mouse eats scorpions, hence why B&T named it this thing, because they wanted this thing to be the scorpion killer, in reference to the CZ Scorpion Evo. At least that's me reading between the lines. I'm not sure what B&T's actual company line is there. But let me go ahead and run over the features and how this thing is set up. So first, up here at the muzzle end, we have two different ways of attaching a suppressor, or I guess a muzzle device if you wanted to. First up, we have your standard 1/2x28 threads under this thread protector here. Then we also have a tri-lug mount. Now, I have not run this thing with a suppressor, so I'm going to have to defer you to the people that have. But given my experience so far, I would say that this thing is probably a pretty awesome suppressor host, but more on that later. Moving back, on the handguard here, you can see that there are 1913 rails on either side. However, these are removable. I wouldn't be surprised if these are actually mag pull rail sections, but I don't know for sure. But these are M-LOK sections. So if you wanted to take these off and get some sort of direct M-LOK mount for anything, you absolutely can, which is a pretty neat option on something like this. We do have full integrated rails on the top and bottom. So if you wanted to put some sort of angle foregrip or a hand stop, or if you SBR'd it, a vertical grip, you absolutely could. And then you can see with this top rail up here, it allows us to have our front sight. Now these sights on both the front and the rear are included from B&T. They're actually pretty nifty, to use that word. You have to fold them up and down manually. They don't spring up or anything like that. They have toolless adjustments, so you just roll this little bar for your elevation, and then on the rear here, you have this little knob back here to go left and right for your windage. So obviously you can use them as a standard sight setup, which your rear one does have two apertures, a fine and a rough aperture, which obviously you can't tell from this angle, but you'll have to take my word for it. The other thing is, if you have it folded down and you're not running an optic on it, and say you're just running this thing kind of Secret Service push-out method where you have it on a sling, there are some crude sights built into the top of this thing. If you're doing really, really close-up stuff, that might work, but for any sense of accuracy, I'd probably tell you to use them in their up configuration or with a red dot, as you can see here. Which I guess just to talk about, this is a SIG Romeo 5 XDR. This is a dual reticle, still in testing. I've been kind of swapping it from a bunch of different rifles and pistols and everything else. For most of the 300 rounds through this thing, I actually had an Aimpoint T2, but considering that was provided from the store that I work at, along with this pistol to do a video on, again, I'll go into more depth on that later. I didn't want to mess up that Aimpoint, so I went ahead and put my own on here for a lot of the other shooting that I've been doing. The charging handle is reciprocating, and as you can see, I have it on the left side here to make it easy to manipulate as a right-handed person, which just while we have it locked open, your bolt release is also ambi, so keeping this thing pointed up. If I push in over here, you can see that that closes as well. Your charging handle is reversible from left side to right side. I think standard factory configuration is on the right side. I went ahead and put it on this left side just for ease of use. Now, I really like the side charging. However, because of the side charging handle, you really have to be careful with mounting optics in this section right here, because if you're not careful, if you have a especially wide like QD mount or anything like that, you're really gonna rake your knuckles. Now this Midwest Industries mount is really low profile from the side, so I wouldn't be worried about this, but the aim point that I was using, its throw lever is on the left side, so if I were to use it and not have it mounted this far back, I would definitely be raking my knuckles. So that's something to keep in mind. Not a huge deal, just again, something to keep in mind. I already showed you the ambi bolt release. If you wanted to lock the bolt open without an empty mag in it, there is a little button right here in front of the trigger guard behind the mag well. If you push up on that and pull the bolt back, that will lock the bolt open. Your mag release, if you saw me use it just there, is immediately below, right here. You have this little action bar right here to drop your mag on the right side. On the left side, we have just another push button that looks a lot like that bolt release in order to remove the mag. So that's kind of neat. Does take some getting used to ergonomically. If you're used to AR style controls, it's easy to go to the bolt release for your mag release. Again, a little bit of training, that's not going to be an issue for most people. Moving back, the safety is completely ambidextrous, and it's a really short throw safety. The nice thing about that is, if you have little Donald Trump hands like I do, it makes it really easy to still get on that thing with a firing grip. You can even just kind of push up with your hand to put it back on safe, but it's also not so long that it digs into your finger like some of those Scorpion factory safeties, which is why a lot of companies are making aftermarket safeties for those. The trigger is pretty good. It's, I guess, to get the comparisons going early, it's far better than like my MP5 trigger, specifically my Zenith C5P trigger. Simply because of the different safety mechanisms, it doesn't have to have the immense weight for the drop safe aspects of it. But I happen to know that with a very little modification, you can actually put an AR trigger in here. So I've actually known people who put Geissele triggers in these, and they seem to work really, really well, which is pretty stinking awesome if I do say so myself. Moving back, the pistol grip is, you're kind of stuck with what you have. That being said, I actually don't mind it at all. It's vertical enough that it's comfortable, even nice, tight in close to your body. Even if you were a crazy person and wanted to run this thing all the way collapsed, it's still a little bit more ergonomic. Let me at least take it to this first position here. It's still fairly ergonomic that way. It's not this really sharp angle, again, like the factory CZ Scorpion pistol grips. But again, if you want to swap it out, you're going to have to replace your entire lower receiver here, and that's kind of a bummer, but you know, it's European, and I guess that's just kind of what they do. This back here is the collapsible tail hook. So this is a tail hook pistol brace. The tail hooks are actually, I think, one of the most functional pistol braces on the market, at least as far as getting your arm in there, getting them ready to use, and actually shooting with them. Which of course is what you should do with these. The cool thing about the tail hooks is they do have an integrated QD mount back here, so you don't have to do any crazy modifications to it. It'll just work straight out of the box. Big downside for specifically the tail hook for this thing is it's like $600, like between $500 and $600, which is kind of a big bummer, but you know, price is kind of an ongoing trend with these, which we'll touch on later. As far as that goes, really everything else I'll kind of cover very briefly when I talk, just barely touch on disassembly, but that's kind of the pistol in a nutshell. So let's do some more shooting with it, and I'll give you some more of my thoughts on this thing. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about the internals of this thing, and in so doing talk about the disassembly of this thing. If you're used to MP5s or anything like that, this is going to be a very familiar process. So obviously first we're going to lock it open, drop the magazine, and then you have 3 captured push pins that we're going to have to take off in this case. All of them are going to push from left to right, and you could probably usually do it with your fingers if it's a little bit worked in, since it's still pretty new. Actually, when I started shooting this thing, again, we got it in used, but it had maybe like a mag through it, and I honestly believe it after looking at the internals of this thing. So first I'm going to go ahead and do the lower receiver here. So I'm just going to take this bullet tip and push in on both of these. Theoretically, you could just do the one. Again, it is captured unlike the HK ones, and now your whole lower assembly lifts off. So if you just need to do basic cleaning, that's a perfectly adequate way to do it. But let me go ahead and push out this rear one. And I hopefully won't have to do this off camera, but we'll see. So I'm gonna just kind of gently rock this thing down, and you have to be careful because once you get this thing out of the way, your guide rod and recoil springs are gonna want to pop out like that. So I'm gonna set this tail hook down, and we'll dig in a little bit deeper. So first up, we have here your dual recoil spring and dual recoil or guide rod assembly here. Obviously, there's a little bit more that goes into the recoil system of this, but overall, this is a very effective system. This is easily one of the softest shooting subgun style guns I've ever shot, maybe with the exception of the full-size MP5, but without shooting it side by side, this thing might be better, and if it's not better, it's pretty dang close. So I'm going to set this off to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the charging handle here. All we have to do is, you can see these little enlarged holes at the rear end of the rails here. And let me just go ahead and remove this entire lower receiver here by pulling that pin out. So I'm going to move the charging handle to that little takedown position, pull the charging handle out, and then pull our bolt out. Now back here we have this little, as I understand it, hydraulic plunger, which helps, again, dampen that recoil. Instead of slapping against the back of the receiver, it kind of nullifies that a little bit, and again makes this thing exceptionally soft shooting. Now if we look down here at the bottom, I'll probably have to roll into close-up picture. There's a little picture of a grasshopper mouse eating a scorpion, which is, again, I think, reading between the lines, a little bit of a jab towards CZ. Inside we have a fixed ejector, which makes this thing eject very positively. I'm looking at a field of brass off here to the side, which is going to be fun to clean up as it's getting later. But you have this nice big bolt assembly. Now, as you can tell, there's no roller locks or anything like that, so it is blowback. However, for a blowback gun, again, this thing is very, very nice shooting. The roller delay blowback in the HKs is probably still my favorite, but this thing feels really, really good. And it's going to be hard to appreciate through the camera, but just the way this whole thing glides inside the receiver, I mean, Swiss watch comparisons all day long. Just, again, the fact that this thing is Swiss made, it absolutely shows in the quality of the machining and the fit and everything else about this thing. It's just exceptionally well made, and it just glides in there. It's really, really nice. So to finish reassembling this thing, we're going to just push our little springs back into the little holes on the rear of that bolt there, which can take a little bit of lining up. And then I'm going to take the tail hook, use this to kind of push those in, catch that little button on top, and push this thing up into position like that. And I'm going to go ahead and lock this thing in so that the recoil assembly doesn't go flying out. Now we just need to attach our lower receiver. Just like an AR, just line up that front pin there, line up the rear pin here, do a function check, and we're good to go. Now, one thing is, as you can see, the trigger is fired. I can still put it on safe, unlike an AR. Just throwing that out there. But we're all back together, and I've already swapped the charging handle to the other side if you wanted to run it that way. So really all we'd have to do now is take a loaded magazine, which this thing unfortunately isn't, and this thing would be ready to rock and roll. So at this point, I want to try to wrap up my thoughts about this GHM9. This is the first B&T product I've ever used. I've seen stuff about B&T for a while now. Military Arms Channel has been talking about their TP9s for a few years now, and I've seen a little bit about these. I know Plaid Daddy, or Grantham, has done a review of them, and he had very, very positive things to say. And I thought, well, that's really cool, but given their price range, probably not something I'm ever going to play with, but I'll live vicariously through him. However, as you may know, I work at Mazama Sporting Goods, and we just got this thing in used, and basically I've been working out a deal with the owner to start doing little promo videos for used guns that we get in. Since they're used, doesn't matter if I shoot them, as long as I clean them back up when I'm done, don't do any damage to them. And so figured I'd bring it out, do that little promo video, and while I'm at it, I might as well shoot it a ton more on top of that, and then give you guys my thoughts on this thing and give a little bit more in-depth information to those who may have seen that one but want to know a little bit more about the GHM9. Really, really big thanks to Mazama Sporting Goods in Eugene, Oregon. Definitely come check it out, especially if I'm working there at the time. It's been a really awesome opportunity testing this thing out. Again, you guys know I'm a really big fan of my Zenith MP5. But as I said when I did my review of that, there are some shortcomings that this thing absolutely overcomes when it comes to ergonomics, ease of use, and just user friendliness. It's not without its drawbacks, but let me start with the pros. So first of all, one of the huge things that this has over an MP5 is an integrated sight rail along the entire top of this thing. Yes, you can get optic rails for an MP5 or any of those HK style guns. However, you're really starting to raise up that cheek height, and a lot of times if you just have that little claw scope mount and you run a red dot, your red dot is going to be going right into the hood of that front sight. Now there are like hoodless front sights where you don't have to worry about that, but for a lot of us that's kind of more effort than it's really worth, and you're kind of stuck with what you got. This, having the integrated sight rail with the intent of having those optics mounted where they're supposed to be for us, those of us familiar with ARs, this is an excellent option for us. The other big thing that you miss out with on the MP5 is last shot hold open, which this thing, if I can rock it all the way back, does have. So you are alerted to an empty magazine, and then when you insert the new magazine, you don't have to worry about locking the bolt open. You just insert your new mag, push your mag release, or run the charging handle, and you're good to go. Is it a huge deal having no last shot hold open on an MP5? Kinda. I mean, when it first came out, no, not at all. But by today's standards, it is really, really nice having some sort of feel and sound difference when you're actually running empty. Now, I know the whole thing, if you won't notice under stress or under combat, well, yada, yada, yada. Cool, that's fine. I want it. So I'd rather have it and not notice it than not have it at all. So there's kind of my opinion on that. Downside is it is a reciprocating charging handle. Now, the nice thing about reciprocating charging handles is you can use it as a forward assist if you needed to help get your gun into battery. But 90% of the time, if something doesn't want to go into the chamber, I probably shouldn't force it. There's probably something going on that I need to be aware of. But under adverse conditions, if you're running it dirty, you're running it hot, if you've been running it suppressed, having something there can be pretty nice. And the fact that it is convertible from right hand to left hand is pretty nifty. Now, again, being a right-hander, with that reciprocating charging handle, doing a magwell grip like I typically do on the MP5, it does not come in contact with that reciprocating charging handle. So through the 300 or so rounds that I've put through this thing today, that has not arisen as an issue. Could it in the future or in unconventional shooting positions? Sure, but so far, no issues there. Now, one of the other big drawbacks of something like this is the expense, and just kind of expense all across the board. So I believe brand new, these pistols without the tail hook run about $1,600. We have a new one in the store, but I can't remember off the top of my head what we're asking for it. And like I said, this tail hook assembly here, just this rear section, is about like $575, which is absolutely not cheap. And also, this thing is not beard friendly. Like right away and continuously throughout shooting this thing, it has been snagging beard hairs all day long. So not the most beard friendly assembly back here, but it does make this thing infinitely more shootable. Magazines are about $50 a piece for the 30 rounders. They do make other sizes, 10s, 20s, and 30s that I know of. They might be doing 40s as well, but I know for sure 10s, 20s, and 30s. They're about $50 a piece regardless of what capacity. Now, compare that to the MP5 with the HK mags or MKE mags being about $70 a piece. 50 is not bad, not great, but not bad. Still more than CZ Scorpion mags, so that's definitely worth mentioning. Now, expense aside, I do think you are getting something for that money. Maybe not with the tail hook, but for everything else, you are getting something for the money. This is an exceptionally well-made and well-thought-out little subgun. Again, very soft recoil impulse in something this size. You are getting a little bit longer barrel than my C5P, and even with the brace all the way collapsed, it is a slightly larger overall package than my Z5P. But overall, this thing is just a very, very well-made gun. It's exceptionally accurate. I'll show you guys a 30-shot group I did at 10 yards. It's only 10 yards, but it's also a 30-shot group for what that counts. Maybe center to center, an inch. I'm not going to complain about that. I was also shooting this thing. I did it started at 25 yards, did a 5-shot on steel, immediately moved the steel up to 45 yards, 5 more rounds, and immediately put it up to 60 yards, did 10 rounds, missed 1 shot. But that's, huffing and puffing, moving steel, and I was hitting it just fine. So I really can't complain about the accuracy of this thing. The ergonomics of this thing are excellent. Maybe a little bit of getting used to between the bolt release and the mag release, but just an exceptionally well-made gun. To the point where if it wasn't for the pure nostalgic value of the MP5, this is actually cheaper than a Z5P. I think I would rather have one of these than a Z5P. Again, if you want pure nostalgia, if you want the pure sex appeal of the HK roller delay blowback MP5 looking guns, absolutely get one of those. But for pure function and a little bit of sex appeal on top of that, man, these things are really, really excellent. Now, I don't have any experience with the APC9 or the TP9 or anything like that, but I can honestly say that this thing is phenomenal. And just this little bit of exposure to Brugger and Thomet, which I guarantee I butchered out of Switzerland, I can only imagine that those things are excellent as well, which also goes to show why they probably earned the military contract. It's not very often I say companies earned a military contract. I think B&T legitimately earned theirs. Now again, this is significantly more expensive than a Scorpion, but man, I think just ergonomics and everything else about this thing make it probably worth it if you can afford it. If all you can afford is a Scorpion, that's an excellent option as well, but this thing is just hands down the nicest shooting, nicest ergonomics, all around subgun I've ever used to date. It's also worth mentioning too, as far as the magazines go, I only had 1 magazine for the duration of the testing today, which means this 1 magazine has over 300 rounds through it, which is more than I typically get through a single magazine, even if I'm doing a 1,000 round test, because I usually have 4 or 5 mags that's being shared between, so maybe they'll get 200. I've had 0 malfunctions with this magazine. I've been shooting primarily S&B 115 grain full metal jacket, but no issues whatsoever in that time. So mags aren't cheap, but they seem to be good to go. No steel feed lips, but I haven't heard yet of issues with these. But then again, there's not as many of these in circulation as the Scorpion Evos. So if you guys know something about that, definitely let me know. So if you're interested or you're in the market for one of these GHM9s and you're watching this probably pretty quick after I post it, definitely head into Mazama Sporting Goods in Eugene, Oregon, because again, this one will be for sale there used. We are a licensed dealer, so you're going to have to do a background check and all that fun stuff. But definitely come in and check it out. If not, we always do get these in new, so we can obviously get those for you as well. We also try to carry as many of the mags and other accessories as we can in store, but I think if you try this thing, you're going to become a believer as well. I'm very, very impressed by this, but I'll try to hide my gushing at this point. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, definitely throw those in the comment section down below. If you have any experience with the GHM9 or the 45 or any of the other B&T subguns, definitely let me know. I'm very, very interested in the overall performance of these things, kind of across the board and what's out there on the market. Again, this thing did come in used, very, very lightly used to the store. And again, I want to thank Mazama Sporting Goods for giving me the opportunity to come out and run this thing, especially with that aim point. That aim point is pretty freaking sweet. It's the T2 again. And again, we do carry those in store along with some other aim points and EOTechs if you guys are into the high-end red dot game. I want to also thank my patrons for making a video like this one possible as well. While Mazama's did provide ammo to do their little short promo video, in order to do a review of it, I wanted, or abbreviated review, I guess. I wanted to buy a bunch of ammo to run through this thing, and that would not have been possible without the contributions from my patrons over there on Patreon. Because of that, I post all my content over there early. We do live streams, we do Discord servers, we do a bunch of other stuff over there. I do some exclusive content for them over there. So if any of that stuff sounds interesting, or you just want to financially support the channel, definitely head over to Patreon. But again, come into Mazama Sporting Goods, or at least check out our website, or call in for more details on something like this. But anyway, with all that said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.